Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to episode number 46 of Nautel's Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. I'm your host, Jeff Welton. He totally blew it on me. I was really hoping I could make a joke because Shane and I were talking right before this all started, and he says, "Yeah, I'm running a little behind." And I said, "I reserve the right to make a fashionably late remark, but I see that just in the bare nick of time, I look at my screen and I see Shane Toven. So Shane, welcome aboard."
Ha ha! I am here. I'm stuck in traffic, but I am here.
Oh, there you go. And so Shane is on his way to the office, and he is running mobile right now. So I assume you'll be fired onto the computer when you get to the office.
Indeed. And then you'll see my smiling face on the webcam. So,
All righty, very good. Well, that's good because you don't want folks to have to suffer through looking at me too much. Speaking of that, I am going to make an adjustment here so I am not staring at myself nearly as much. Uh, So today we are talking about maintenance, and I emphasized fall maintenance, but this is why I picked Shane for this because Shane has got the best of both worlds. He's done a lot of work in the upper wilds of Minnesota and into Wyoming, and now, of course, you're based out of Sacramento, California, where your temperature's measured with more digits than I'm used to. But on the other hand, you also you cover a good chunk of the U.S. in your travels these days.
yeah, it's true. My current position sees me potentially, I could potentially be just about anywhere in the country these days. But yeah, I'm not going out to transmitter sites, on a daily or weekly basis anymore like I used to. But I still work with the guys in the field pretty quite a bit and make sure that they have what they need. So,
Yeah. And that's one of those cool things too. It's the thing I found support versus sales. You know, when I moved into this job, I got to do a whole lot more picking and choosing where and when I go, and that definitely has its benefits for sure.
indeed, yeah.
So I'm going to, because I know you're mobile, I'm going to randomly mute you at occasion just to kill the background noise a little bit. But for the most part, you're pretty good. Uh, what we're talking about, so the topic is officially fall maintenance. We're going to cover just maintenance in general. And of course, me being me, it wouldn't be right if there wasn't a whole bunch of war stories. I'm going to throw the usual housekeeping preamble in there. We try to make this as interactive as possible. Jerry from Pennsylvania has already given us a good day shout out. Absolutely, you can hit the little question box, type in a question. It's just going past my screen here. Yeah, Dan had asked if a jet just flew past my head, and I'm pretty sure that was a car flying past Shane's window at the moment. But absolutely, type anything you got into the question box. It could be a question, it could be a comment, a criticism, a concern, snarky remarks. We do it all. Like I said, these are meant to be fun and hopefully educational, and we'll try to cover all the bases with that. By all means, if you're an SBE member and you've got a certification, today's webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, qualifies for half of a recertification point under the category I of the recertification schedule. My big camera died, so I've got the laptop up on a pedestal, which means it's blocking my second monitor because it wouldn't be any fun if we weren't, you know, having some fun. Joe Fleming says, good day to everybody, and no mic. See the no mic caveat. There's the other thing, by the way. There's a little hand wavy icon on your control dashboard. If you click that little hand wavy icon, it throws a little warning up on my screen, and we may or may not unmute your mic and make you part of the conversation. So, by all means, let's have some fun and share some thoughts. Now, overall, there are a lot of things to talk about in maintenance, and I'm going to draw pretty heavily from a session we did last fall, very similar to this, where I had Dan Kelly from the Michigan Association of Broadcasters on deck, and he went out and pulled the entire Michigan engineering community and said, "Hey, what are the kind of things you'd like to cover for a fall maintenance session?" So we are absolutely going to hit all that stuff. and all that stuff. They'll call it the best of. I mean, I think this is when I look back through the list, it's like the third maintenance session we've done in the past year or so. So, yeah, I tried to add a little bit of new stuff, and I mean, obviously the tried and true stuff like generators and actually remembering to test your transfer switch. I mean, you can run your generator and load bank it every month, every year, whatever, and that's wonderful. But if you don't test the actual transfer switch by pulling power to the site, then you still don't know if it's going to be there, and that's the big concern. And
Well,
so,
and Jeff,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I've got one other addition to that.
yeah.
Speaking of generators, things like block heaters in the colder climates, or if you've got some kind of system to recirculate the fuel or the oil, you want to make sure all of that is working as well. And of course,
Right.
the battery charger. That's been one of the big ones that has burned me in the.
And it's one of those ones that's caught me at home here. And I've told this story before. I'll tell it again. If you've heard it before, I'm sorry. If you haven't heard it, there you go. But in Vegas one year, I get a phone call from the real boss, and she informs me that we're in the middle of getting a big dump of snow, which happens in this part of the world in April, and that the power has gone out. And then she lets me know that, oh, by the way, I followed the instructions that you gave me, and I went out to the generator and I flicked the little choke lever and I hit the red button, and nothing happened. And in my case, I'd been kind of lax about my generator testing, and the battery had gone dead. So yeah, when I got home, we jump started it. Now it gets tested on a very regular basis, and I think there may have been a bad cable involved too, but or a bad connector. So definitely, Curtis mentions he tests and runs the generator every 3 weeks, and that the sister stations across the state haven't run theirs in over 10 years. And I can guarantee you, like I said, after 6 months and no tests, my generator did not start when I needed it to. And that's probably a pretty safe bet. Now, Shane, how you guys have a pretty good schedule for that sort of thing on general. What's your recommended interval for generator runs?
Generally, I mean, it doesn't hurt to give it a run every time you go to the site. Now, whether or not you want to do a full load test when you do that is up to you. I mean, it certainly doesn't hurt, at least every so often, to do that full load test. I used to, back at the studios in Minnesota, what I would do is just pull the whole breaker to the building and see what happened. And that gave me a really quick education as to what was broken.
Yeah. And that was one of the things that I've gotten in the habit here is at least once a month, ideally a little more often, but at least once a month, my generator is started and run for 15 minutes. And then at least once a quarter, same deal. I mean, it gets switched on to the house and I fire on whatever I can fire on to load it up. Let's see. So Joe mentioned, and there's a good point, had a controller die a few years ago. Um, had no load tested 4 days earlier. In that short time, the controller failed and hosed him in an actual outage. And that is valid. I mean, as with everything else, lightning protection, grounding, generator testing, there's no 100% guarantee, but your odds are a whole lot better that that it'll work if you do a test. And Curtis mentions that they found out it hadn't run it in that long when he was out there and they needed it, and so they were off the air till the power company restored. And depending on your site, that could be days. I mean, so our particular transmitter site is on a power company communications facility, which is beneficial because if they can't talk to the trucks, that tends to get a little more reaction. So when we get an outage, it's dealt with pretty quickly. But yeah, I've seen some sites that the power can go out for literally weeks.
Right, and certainly you could throw more money at the problem and build redundant generator facilities, redundant feeds, and your really elaborate transfer switch system. But even that is no 100% guarantee. I mean, I've seen facilities that have taken every possible precaution, and still there's that one thing that always somehow manages to bite them.
Yeah.
Expect the unexpected, as they say.
Yeah, I mean, about the only way to, if you've got full dual facilities, then maybe if they're on separate feeds, but yeah, there's almost always going to be one choke point somewhere.
Right, and
Yep.
yeah, separate facilities. I mean, if you've got a main and an aux transmitter site that are spatially separated, hopefully on different power companies or different power feeds, then maybe that's one possible solution. I mean, to ensure a little bit more reliability. But there's nothing saying that a natural disaster couldn't do something to take out both of those in a given region. Still,
Yeah. And I've got a note here from, boy, we used the word generator, and the question thing's just scrolling like a ticker tape. Charles DeBay, we had a phase sensing wire. There's a good one. Phase sensing wire drop off its lug in a brand new transfer switch. So during the next real outage, the generator come up, but the transfer didn't happen. And again, this is one of those, we used to beat this drum really, really hard on any new transmitter install, that you go through, you pull the covers off, you grab the wires, you wiggle everything, and just make sure that everything still works. And, that's make sure everything's actually connected and then nothing got mangled up during shipping. So that is really a good point, for that if you do put a new piece in, double check and make sure that all the nuts and bolts are actually connected.
right,
Um,
and I mean, even manufacturers aren't infallible. I mean, and things happen in. Sorry, Jeff. And things
yeah,
happen in shipping too. I mean, so it's
yeah.
definitely a good idea to do a double check.
Oh, there have been lots of times where we'll have something come in that looks pristine, come in or go out. I mean, I've seen it both ways. I've seen it with stuff being delivered to the house where the box looks pristine, the packing, the case of the unit, and then you turn it on and nothing happens. Or you're moving it from point A to point B and you hear the rattle, and it's like, uh-oh. The Dan Gunter is mentioning something about Generacs and stuff. Dan, I don't know if you've got uh, and Ed, Mr. Disembodied Voice himself, who is usually the professional behind the scenes, sent something in chat to everybody to warn you about this. But yeah, I am going to start pulling mutes off. And we'll just let y'all be part of the conversation. Dan, you've got a, good comment here about the Generacs and controllers. If you got a microphone, I've got you unmuted on this end. So if you unmute yourself, then it'd be kind of cool to get you to elaborate on that a little bit. And if you don't have a microphone, oh, there, you're green. Let's hear what you got to say then.
Can you hear me okay, Jeff?
You're a little low, but you're audible. I can hear you.
Okay, I'll try to speak up a little bit. Yeah, I actually run two Generacs here in the house, a 15 and a 13 kW, and the 13, since it was put in, has even three controllers. It's that Nexus series controller, and every replacement that you put in it, it burns it up. And the problem with that one is they changed the design so that the battery charger, instead of being over in a box, just a small trickle charger that's wired up in the transfer switch box, they incorporated it into that controller, and the failure mode is that it will stop charging the battery. And what it will do is it will sit there and the logic boards don't operate until it kills the battery, and then it's dead. So I got tired of fixing that one, and the big one starts up, does the main part of the building and everything. If it goes down, I have a spare battery that I keep out here that I just have to go out there and put jumper cables on to start it up. The other thing I've run into is some of the like 7 kW, I think it is. I've got it at a couple of sites. They use one of those just little, I think it's a 12-volt relay. It's a cheap part, but it's what controls the coils for the transfer switch. Those like to go out, so I recommend anybody that's got the Generac transfer switches, look in there, and if it's got one of those little plug-in relays, go ahead and order yourself a spare, because I've had those fail repeatedly.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mean, it's one of them that if you start to identify your failure points, then it's easy to have the spare. But that's a good point. Might save somebody a few minutes of stress and gray hair right there. Thanks, Dan. Appreciate that.
Yeah, and I've noticed the same thing about not to pick on a particular brand, but I've noticed the same thing about those particular generators. The smaller ones seem to be the ones that tend to put more of the intelligence in the generator enclosure itself. They have most of the control functions in the generator enclosure itself, whereas the larger ones use kind of more of a traditional transfer switch type approach, where most of the logic is actually in the transfer switch. So it is something to be aware of.
Yeah. And to keep it a little more non-denominational, Ira mentioned having a controller malfunction over the weekend where the nature of the power blinks confused the controller and the LCD display had random Greek and Hebrew characters showing, and did a power fail test on Monday and everything worked normally. So he's waiting for a response from his manufacturer, which is named after a feline. Not necessarily any brand specific stuff, but
No,
absolutely.
absolutely not. Yeah.
And this is one of the things that's kind of critical, and I mentioned it in a slide further on, but it's a really good idea if you outsource your generator maintenance to have a good relationship with the with the maintenance company, not just for generators, snow removal, lawn care, whatever you do. Give them some trade outs or give them some station swag or take them out to dinner someday, whatever works for your particular relationship. And just, kind of keep that happy feeling so you've got some confidence that they'll be there when stuff does go a little sideways. Uh, William Harrison makes a good comment here about when you do a battery swap on a generator, put it inside on a maintenance charger so you've got it if you really, really need it. And that's a good point. Like I've got a cheap, and of course I'm up here, it's Canadian Tire, Motomaster brand, but Ace Hardware has them, Home Depot has them, but just the trickle chargers that have a maintenance mode, so they let the battery drain down a little and then charge it up and kind of cycle it instead of just keeping it hard run. And those are a really good idea for something like that because you can leave it connected over the long term, and it'll do a great job at making sure you got something when you. And the other great thing, like I don't know about most, but mine, for example, if a cell does happen to short because it's an old battery, then the charger will shut off rather than starting a fire. That's typically a preferred method of controlling a failure. So let's move ahead a little bit. Now, one of the other things, and I beat on this, especially for those of us in northern climates, but I mean, the folks in Tornado Alley and in the hurricane corridor, you absolutely should have some sort of emergency kit. And this is from a survivalist website called, it's coincidentally 5-gallon ideas or five. I can't see my tagline, but yeah, 5-gallon emergency bucket stuff. So, it just gives you a whole bunch of ideas. You can buy actual kits from them, but they also just give you lists of things. And so, Shane, what are your go-tos? I know you spent a lot of time, like I said earlier, engineering in Minnesota and Wyoming. What are the things that you really think you need to have at a site, especially for winter months? You may not be able to get in and out. That was kind of cool.
Let's try that again, shall we?
Hey, Shane, turn your radio down, would you?
Yes. Oh, here we go. Let's see if I'm able to see you now. There we are. Hi.
Shane made it to work, everybody. So presenting live and in person, the late Shane Toven. All right. Anyway, I said I was going to get at least one snide remark in about that.
Yeah, you couldn't help it, and I deserved it. So,
so survival kits.
Yeah, survival kits, especially on mountaintop sites that are, in the wintertime closed in. Yeah, I mean, this, what you've got in a picture there is a great start, but things like making sure you've got water at the site first and foremost. I mean, I can't emphasize the importance of that enough. maybe some non-perishable food items. I've always kind of said that you should probably have something enough up there, enough supplies to be able to kind of hunker down for a few days in case you do need to be rescued from a remote site. Because as some of you know, the winter time, I mean, those sites are, I mean, it's helicopter access to some of those sites in the wintertime once they get shut in. So
Right. And I mean, even not just wintertime necessarily, but like if you're down in the panhandle of Florida and you're at the site babysitting during a hurricane, it may be a couple of days before they can cut down the trees and get you out of there.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, I
Absolutely.
mean,
So,
our general rule of thumb up here, where we tend to get the smaller hurricanes and the smaller snowstorms, but our general guideline is 3 days. You
yeah.
need enough food, water, and supplies to get you through 3 days of no contact.
And the other thing I will mention is batteries. Plenty of batteries, because there's
Yep.
nothing worse than getting to a site, having a flashlight or something that you really need, and or any portable equipment, if it powers out, for instance, and finding out that you have no batteries, or that your batteries that were in it were completely dead. So yeah, back to that whole
Yep.
testing thing.
Right. Curtis mentions a good one here, power bank for USB devices. Like you can
Yes.
now, I mean, I remember, and I've got a couple of them around here somewhere, none immediately in reach, but like when a 5,000 milliamp hour battery brick was awesome. And I mean, when they got them down to the size of a cell phone, it was like, wow, these are cool. And he makes a good point. Like now, you can get them in 50,000 milliamp
So one
sizes.
caveat to those, and it's less a problem now than it used to be. Some of those have a lot higher kind of self-discharge rate than others do. Some of them,
Hmm.
I mean, they'll just sit there, and I don't know what they do internally to keep them from discharging, but some of them will just sit there, and if they're charged up, they'll just stay charged up until you need them. But others, they just have a nasty habit of discharging themselves. So it might be,
Oh,
again, something
yes.
you want to test and make sure that it actually behaves
Yep.
the way you expect it to.
No, that's and that is a really good point. I mean, I just, as you know, went on my first field trip in 549 days. Not that
It
I
was
was
good to see you.
counting.
Yeah.
It was good to be seen. Better to be seen than to be viewed. But all right, today is Jeff's bad dad joke day, apparently. Anyway, um, so yeah, it was, but that was one of the things I discovered. I mean, I've got a Mophie pack that I use, on the road, especially the old S7 starting to get a little weak. And like today, it's down to 65%, 5 hours after I unplugged it. So, it is just slowly getting there. And I mean, it wasn't for the fact that it's such a nuisance, I'd put in for a new one, but I really like everything. It's set up and it works.
So
So
one of
yeah,
the
but that was where I was going. I picked up the Mophie to get ready for this trip, and it was fully charged when I set it down a year and a half ago, and it was deader than it, last week. So
Yeah,
yep,
reminds me, I've got a couple of them out in my garage. I should probably check and see see if they've still got a charge on them. Because
yeah,
yeah, I've got one that's the same way. If I don't, keep it on the charger when I'm not using it, it's dead by the time I actually need it. But
yeah.
others, it's like they've got a little nuclear reactor in there or something. It's
So
just
you want to know the coolest thing, and this is not really related to these specifically, except it kind of sort of is. And I picked this up from, well, we've talked about it before, but of course I was out visiting Alex Hartman, who, as everybody knows, is our resident mad scientist and breaker of things.
yeah.
And Alex had this power bar. And we've talked about IP addressable power bars. Well, this was, it was Amazon capable. Okay, yeah. So I can say Alexa without having the little third voice
Now
come in and
everybody else has just went off.
yeah. But anyway, so at least I didn't say the S word and get all the other folks too. But so the cool thing about these little power bars is they're not only IP accessible for resetting and turning on and off or voice controlled, but you can configure them to run schedules. So you could have your power bricks all plugged in and cycle them, like charge them for a week, let them go for a week, and just that way they're always fresh. So, and I mean the one that he showed, and I'll try to remember to to look it up later. Actually, I could probably do it on the other big company that sells stuff. But yeah, again, it's just a fairly inexpensive thing, and they're like 30, $40 for a 3 outlet one, 50 or 60 for a 6 outlet one. Casa is the one I'm looking at, KASA Smart Plug.
Yep.
But
They are.
anyway,
They're really those. I've used those as well. They're inexpensive and they they really work well for that type of application.
yeah,
Yeah, that
uh,
that brings up another good point actually for remote sites. Something you might want to consider installing is some kind of remote power cycling type of device, something you can get into, or something that can automatically, if it can't reach the outside world, try to power cycle things.
hmm
I've used units from both Triplite and lately units from a company called CyberPower, and they really do seem to work well. They can save your bacon if you've got a piece of equipment out there that's locked up and you want to reboot. You still got connectivity to the site, but you want to try to reboot just that piece of equipment. Say if it's a satellite receiver or audio processor, whatever, something that's out at your site that's keeping you off the air, but a simple power
right,
cycle will fix it.
yeah,
Solves the 500-mile round trip to push a button problem.
yep, and that's a really good point. And this is Dan had mentioned in the comments too that that some automotive techs or some techs have told them that continuously trickle charging batteries can shorten their life. So if you can do it on a periodic basis,
You know,
that
it's interesting. I've seen it depends on the manufacturer, really.
right,
Some of them do a much better job of battery management than others. I mean, we've all seen the horror stories of lithium ion batteries that have turned laptops and phones into a into a balloon.
yep,
But I've seen other devices where you leave them plugged in for months, years on end, and it
hmm
doesn't hurt the battery one bit. So it
well,
really
and
does depend on the manufacturer.
right, and I mean like that MotoMaster one that I referenced earlier, it has a quote unquote stay fresh mode where it tops it off and then it lets it sit for a week or two, and then so yeah, it just cycles a charge every so often.
Right.
So that's a really good point.
Yeah.
Another
So,
one on the emergency kit one, John Van Milligan mentioned finding packs like this at a sporting goods store.
yep.
And
Good point.
yep, absolutely. Hardware stores, sporting goods stores, camping supply places are great for things like this.
Yeah, and especially if you're, I mean, if you're in a place like, a region like the Rocky Mountain region, any mountainous region, I mean, uh, you'll find that your local suppliers have, appropriate kits for whatever you might encounter in your particular region. So,
Yep. Yeah. Now, Dan mentions that a few months ago they spent 14K on a four-seater UTV with a dump bed winch and full lighting and a bit more for a trailer, and that he had a couple of sites he wouldn't try to get to in a Jeep Liberty. And so you have a story about that, and in a few pictures, few slides, there's actually photographic evidence from the Wyoming days. I think you were, I don't remember if you were tangentially involved in that particular thing, but anyway, we'll get to that in a little bit too.
you'll have to
Um,
refresh my memory. There've been so many.
And then lots of talk about NiCads versus lithium ion, and that's a good point. Nickel cadmium will lose a good chunk of its charge every day,
Yeah,
whereas
and
lithium ion does tend to last a whole lot longer between
yeah,
needing charge cycles.
I was going to mention that as well. It never hurts to fully charge something and then just use it on battery until it's discharged and then plug it in and
Yeah,
let it charge. I mean,
yeah.
those
Oh,
cycles, I
that's
mean, yeah, we got that drilled into our heads back in the NiCad days. And I mean, it may or may not have any effect on lithiums, but it certainly doesn't hurt. So,
right. That's something I forgot to mention. These, of course, this isn't going to show at all because, yeah, it's white. But these little Casa smart plug outlet bars that I was talking about, the other cool thing about them is they measure power consumption.
hmm
So not only can they tell you if that outlet's on or off, and you can control whether it's on or off, they will also tell you how much current it's drawing at any given time. So that's kind of one of those things that can be useful. And there are several other brands that do similar things, but it's very much the sort of thing.
Here,
Greg
Jeff,
mentions that,
let me
yeah,
take a crack at let me take a crack at that if I can. I don't know if it'll let me share that or not, but Maybe not. Maybe I can't share my
Well,
screen.
no, I have the ability to change that. Make you the presenter. You ready?
Yep,
Here
go
we
for it.
go. So, folks,
All right. So let's
Shane
see if it
now
lets
has the
me.
helm.
Let's see if it lets me show my screen here. Here we go. Which one? There we go. Screen sharing. All right. Show screen. And I
Yep.
want to show that one. There we go. So I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but yeah, this is the one that
Yeah.
that's
That
one of
is
them.
the
There are a number of them, but yeah, this one's really kind of handy.
right, and that's the one that I was talking about too, where it's got the ability to do, like I said, power monitoring, individual outlet control. It also has a little USB charger. Of course, if you're up there and the power's out, that's irrelevant. But for charging your devices and as far as keeping power bricks and batteries charged up, or anything you need to get into and cycle on occasion, it's just really useful for that.
Right. So yeah, one thing to note is that this is the this is a Wi-Fi only connected power strip. So if you don't have Wi-Fi available, that's something to be aware of if you want to use something like this. But
Yeah. So, and Greg mentions that both Cummins and Caterpillar recommended changing generator batteries every 3 years. So that's also very much, yeah. I mean, you don't leave the same battery in forever. All
right.
right, moving forward, the other thing about fall maintenance is it's a good time to clean up the temporary stuff. I promised the station on the left, where I took that picture last week in a state that'll remain nameless, except for the people that know where I was last week. But you know, and that one, he was flat out admitting, look, this is temporary. We're moving an ATU, and you know, I promise you, it'll be fixed next time I go through. So I took the photo for posterity. I'll be through again next June, and we'll swing by and take another photo and see
And
what we
yeah,
see.
we've all seen it. We've all done it. But yeah,
Yeah.
it is important to actually make sure those temporary fixes don't become permanent.
And fall maintenance run, or just any scheduled maintenance run, is a really good time to wander through and do that. Now, the other thing, and I beat this drum, like I said, I mean, I could probably go on commission from FLIR for the little FLIR cams, but whatever infrared device you use, a regularly scheduled maintenance run is a really good time to go through and find the the things that you really want to address. And this one is a prime example of something that was caught before the fire happened. And what had happened was, in this case, obviously the neutral connection went away. Uh, that's the kind of thing that can cause you a lot of grief. By the way, backtracking a hair, Chris Hayes made a comment that CASA does need Bluetooth for initial setup, and they don't tell you unless they don't find it. So just
Good
be
point.
aware of that. And
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that's the kind of thing that can bite you in the butt if you're trying to set one up in the field. So Shane, do you guys do a lot of thermal readings yet? I mean, I know you've been.
We do actually. Yeah. In fact, a lot of our guys have been, we've have those little FLIR imagers or something similar to it, where they go, they go through and just as part of their routine inspections, they'll look for things like this and then get them corrected as soon as possible. So funny story, actually, I was on a mountaintop in Wyoming once, and this site was notorious. I'll leave the owner. I won't name names just to protect the innocent. But anyway, so at this site, it had been known for various issues and power problems over the years. Well, one winter, the neutral opened up, and there's nothing scarier than going into your site and seeing a wire that shouldn't be glowing orange. Yeah, so needless to say, we got the power company out there and that was corrected very quickly. Although I think they may have made a temporary fix that became permanent, which
Mhm.
is kind of frustrating, but yeah.
Permanent-ish, yeah. And I mean, this is just one of those things. Like I said, whether it's a connection broken out at the pole pig, whether it's a loose connection. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many times I've seen a stranded wire into a compression fitting in a breaker panel where it just worked loose because the copper compresses.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
and in some cases, we've still got the old aluminum versus copper problem as well. I'd like to think that a lot of those old breaker boxes and circuits have been updated and fixed, but we know, in reality, a lot of those sites may still have really old electrical wiring, and some of them, in fact, are still aluminum. And
right.
Yeah.
And this is one of those situations where if you don't have a thermal camera yourself and you don't have the budget, I mean, they're getting down in price, but they're still a couple $300. And but somebody who does, maybe buy them lunch and have them come out and just take a couple of shots of your breaker panels, and it doesn't take a whole lot of time, really. I mean, I'll walk into a site and do a thermal scan right across the room in less than 5 minutes.
Yeah, so I'll make one good point about thermal scans. I mean, if you're talking about scanning things like scanning breaker box is one thing, but you also might want to look at scanning transmission lines, things like that. Just look for hot spots. But one thing to be aware of is the emissivity of the material that you're scanning.
Yes.
So you may actually have to affix a small piece of tape to various points to give your meter something to actually, or your camera something to actually reference.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, can you explain emissivity a little bit? And
So the short answer, and my layman's term, basically the reflection. If it's got any shiny qualities to it, then yeah, it can impact an infrared reading. I've stood in front of a 50 kilowatt transmitter with a nice gloss front on it and taken a picture and seen my own outline reflected in the heat imprint, which is really kind of cool and more than a little spooky. But yeah, so you absolutely need a non-reflective substance. And of course, being Canadian, I recommend hockey tape because you can get that in just about any colors. And there, Dan makes a comment, spraying Johnson's foot powder on metallic objects is a good way to temporarily lower the reflectivity and get better emissivity. So that's a good way of doing it. Yeah, I never thought about that. But anything basically, like I said, for me, hockey tape is my go-to, white adhesive tape and various things like that. I mean, I like cloth tape because it's non-reflective. And,
I watched a webinar recently that was talking about this subject, among other things, specifically related to drones with infrared cameras and measuring transmission lines, measuring towers. But he gave a great explanation on this subject in terms of emissivity and how to measure things like transmission lines properly. And I'll have to see if I can dig that up. If I can, I'll send you the link, Jeff, and maybe you can pass it along.
that'd be very cool. Yeah, at the very least, we'll turn it into a tips article. I know more than one or two drone pilots, and we did a session about this a little while ago. Had Jim Gray from Optimized Media in talking about doing drone surveys and things like that. So this is the specific slide that I was talking about earlier, and I don't remember if you were involved with Wyoming Public Radio then.
Oh,
But
that
this,
one. Yes, I
yeah,
was, in fact. Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
And this was a particular situation where there was a requirement for a site visit at a time of year when snowcats and cars were not really an option, if I recall.
right. And at that time, we didn't have a functional snow tracked vehicle to get into sites. So this one was kind of interesting. Our program director at the time, he had horses, and he was used to taking them out into the mountains all times a year. So sure enough, he offered, and he said, "We can do that." He said, "Yeah." So they loaded up the horses, and he and one of my chief engineer at the time, they went out. They ended up going to the site. You can see he's got one horse there that's just got the packs, and the PD there is riding the other horse. And my chief, he rode yet another horse, and they just went into the site, and sure enough, they were able to get in. And it was a fun trip for sure. I didn't get to go on that trip, unfortunately, but it was certainly fun, and I loved the pictures that they
Yeah,
brought back.
and I mean it is. I've got the link there for the specific article about it. Yeah, Ira says 3 horsepower,
That's about it. I
but
think they had 4 on that trip, actually. One of them was a Percheron. He was huge, but he was a
Yeah.
So gentle and great to ride.
I grew up across the road from a house where they raised pulling like proper workhorses, and they were mostly Clydesdales, but yeah, and I mean so big, you could lay down on one of those things. It's almost like laying in a double bed.
I
And
think the I think the funniest picture from that whole trip was the horses gathering, together behind one of the towers or one of the structures to get out of the wind, and you could see it was just, you know,
mhm,
uh, yeah, it was the site conditions on that trip were pretty extreme. So,
yeah. And I mean that's, the most extreme case. I shot a little bit of video a couple of weeks ago. We had the tail end of, before I went on my trip, of course, we had the tail end of Hurricane Ida go through. And that is about the time that our transmitter decided to suffer its first off-air incident in 6.5 years and eat a power supply.
hmm.
So, given that we live 45 minutes from the place that makes the things, we don't stock a lot of spares. So Jamie, our primary, he's our GM, general engineer, one of the founders of the station, and the guy that everybody points to when we need something done. But he ran out, got the new power supply, and yeah, I got to run the truck through foot-high mud puddles and a little bit of good old Nova Scotia clay with a lot of water on. It was entertaining time. So yeah, you do, coming back to the survival kit and everything, you do kind of have to assume there are going to be times when getting in and out is a little more challenging in a lot of cases.
I found the webinar, by the way, on that on the drones and towers and temperature measurements. It was actually an SBE webinar. So here,
Oh, good.
I'll paste the link to you, and you can paste it in the chat.
Yes,
There we
and
go.
actually, going to say you could do that too.
Oh, you know
Ed,
what? I actually can. That's right.
let's
Here we
see here.
go. Or can I? Nope, I can't.
Well, that's okay
Anyway,
because it can grab it now. It'll be able to see it in the chat and throw it out so everybody can get it. But yeah, webinars by SBE, drones for tower inspection, and there you go. And yeah, that's a good thing because if it referenced the emissivity, that's something that say I've seen a lot
it
of
was a
folks.
yeah. This was a really great session. Paul is a great, great instructor, really knowledgeable guy. So I definitely recommend going back and watching this. If you're an here's a plug, my plug for the SBE. Got to do
Yeah,
it.
if you're a member
If
plus,
you're a member plus, it's free. If you're just a member, you can register for like $62, but it's 90 minutes and it's well worth it.
and I mean, there's something to be aware of. The SBE does have a big collection of educational webinars in there, and if you are a Member Plus member, you do have access to the entire archive. So definitely, yep, something to keep about. Now, the other thing to think about when we're doing our regular maintenance schedules, of course, we take care of the things like the vice grips holding the cables together, but it's also a good time to look at cable management because winter sometimes bring winds and lovely things like that. And when you've got a curtain of cables like this, you're going to have a much higher risk of things getting busted, so to
So
speak.
that picture actually reminds me, one thing that is really important to check is your, especially as you go into winter, are your guy anchor points, because once winter hits, those are likely to be buried in snow, and
Hmm.
you want to make sure that there are no trees nearby that could potentially collapse onto your guy anchors and take, add extra stress, maybe take it down if there's, you know, um, if things aren't up to snuff. So definitely things to watch out for. But yeah, that picture of all those cables is,
They
is another
must have
one.
been held together with white tie wraps.
I kind of wonder. Oh my goodness.
Now, this is another one of these slides that I was talking about that Dan and the engineers in Michigan put together, and they just kind of hit their bullet points. And they talked about rodent control and sealing holes. And Gary Morell's mentioned this. I've had a couple of people tell me. But one of the cool things you can do is pick the brightest, sunniest day you possibly can, go into the site and shut all the lights off. And then look for any hint of sunlight glimmering in through any crack crevice, because if you can see light coming in, you're going to see mice and other critters coming in.
Exactly. It's amazing the small holes that these critters can get through. I mean, it's
Yeah.
I mean, even, just a fraction of their body size, they can compress and they can squeeze their way through it.
Absolutely. I mean, somebody posted a picture then of a possum going through a regular chain link fence, a 1 inch, like the regular, I guess those are 2 inch. But yeah, I mean, possums arguably are probably less destructive than mice, rats, and some of the other things we see.
Yeah,
But
well, one of the biggest ones that I see is actually on buildings, looking at the exit ports, the bulkhead on the building. A lot of times I'll see ports that aren't fully sealed or aren't sealed well or aren't sealed at all,
mhm.
and you're just asking for critters to get in there. And yeah, some of them can climb up there and they'll or climb across your transmission lines and they will find their way in.
Yeah. And it was a funny coincidence that this happened to be in the slide deck that I was putting together, and Fiona's tip in our site today on our social media was talking about critter proofing. Beyond that, in the advanced registration questions, less a question and more a comment, but Kirk Harnack had mentioned the importance of doing this. I'm just taking a peek to see if Kirk's logged in. No, he's probably busy, but Kirk's with Telos Alliance, and he gives us a lot of cool tips and stuff like this. So it is really, really useful for that. The thing to remember is when you're packing a hole with steel wool and throwing the great stuff or the expanding foam in, regular steel wool will oxidize and disintegrate in no time flat. So you can buy copper wool or stainless wool for, a couple of bucks for a package at your local hardware store. Now, let's see. Okay, Greg Smicky has also mentioned in their area they have a pile of snowmobiles, so they make it a really good point to mark their guy anchor points with yellow guy markers and paint the
Yeah,
anchors
point.
aviation orange.
Excellent
So,
point.
yeah, both for the safety of the snowmobiler and because having somebody run a 500-pound machine into one of your guy wires at some speed more than
That's
anything.
going to be a bad day for everyone involved.
Yeah, there's no way that's going to end well. And now here's a question from Ray Lewis. Do 7/16 DIN connectors, and I said 7/16, but it's actually 7-16 because it's talking about the thread pitch or thread counts, but do they need weather seal?
Well, actually, I mean, it certainly never hurts, but they do, like many other connectors, they have a rubber seal built into them. But it really doesn't hurt to weather seal them. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean that's again one of those things that you know my general rule of thumb is if it's outdoors, it should be weatherproof.
right.
Oh, the exception would obviously be anything that's got an exothermic bond, like if a brazed ground wire, not so much.
Right.
But if it's two wires clamped together, which I've already made my opinion pretty clear on, but if it's anything like that, then you probably should have. And what's that mastic, the black tape that compresses and squishes that the tower guys use?
Oh, the 3M stuff,
I'm
and I forget what the number is, but a lot of people just call them people just call them monkey turds.
Yeah, and I mean that's the kind of thing that you definitely want to pay attention to. Brian Black asked where you can find stainless wool, and I just Googled stainless steel wool on Amazon and found a 12-pack for 20 bucks.
Yeah, any
Um,
hardware store should carry it, or most,
yeah,
most
I mean
stores should, you know, sell it.
they're scouring pads, so
Right.
you'll find it in some of the grocery stores that tend to have gadgets and stuff. You'll find sometimes too. Um, John Van Milligan makes a good comment. Make sure your snowmobile or snowcat gets serviced late or on a
Yeah,
regular basis as well. Again, like
excellent
the
point.
generator, it's no good if it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Butylene tape. Thank you, William. That's
There
what
you
it
go.
is.
Yeah.
I knew somebody would have the answer in there somewhere. So again, by all means, look for the places the critters get in and seal those holes up. And didn't you mention something about batteries earlier?
I think we did. Yeah.
Everywhere. So again, and I typically I'm that guy that learns these lessons the hard way. So
I
the
have no idea what you're
easiest way.
talking about, Jeff.
Easiest way for me to learn a lesson is to irritate my wife with it, like the one on generator maintenance. So this particular trip, I get a ping at about 5 o'clock in the morning, and somebody says the smoke detector upstairs is making this nonstop beeping sound, and it's driving me crazy, and it woke the dogs up. And because as you know, Shane, once the dogs are awake, everybody's awake.
Everybody's awake.
But so that was one of the situations. Of course, we've got whole house smoke detection system, and it's all wired into the electrical with battery
They all
backup.
start beeping when one of them starts beeping.
And the other thing about them is that if you have battery only detectors, you get used to changing them at least once a year, usually twice a year. Every time change. When they're wired into the house, the batteries are only used sporadically.
Yeah,
I mean, this particular battery was dated 2018, so that's one of those do as I say, not as I do things.
yeah, easy to
But
forget about that. Speaking of
batteries
which,
are now in Alexa on the regular maintenance schedule for the house.
and Jeff just ticked off everybody with one of those devices again.
I won't say I do it on purpose, but speaking of which, you were saying.
I was going to say, so speaking of smoke detectors, they do have a defined lifetime. You are supposed to replace them every so often as well. So if you haven't replaced your smoke detectors in a while, it's probably a good time to check on that and see if you
Right.
might need to replace them.
And Ira makes a good point too, as ambient temperature drops, batteries
Mm,
fail faster.
it does. Yep.
Batteries do have a specified operating
Yeah.
operating
I mean,
range.
the shelf life of typical dry cell batteries is fairly good. I mean, Duracell, Energizer. I mean, you could set those things on a shelf, and they'll
Yeah,
still be good by the time you need them. Although, I mean, if it's like 10 years down the road, maybe you might that might be a different subject. But for the
yeah,
most part, they're pretty shelf stable.
right.
But
Well,
yeah, you do want to
Alan,
keep them in a normal temperature range.
right. Alan mentioned in the splice or the tape that's 3M linerless rubber splicing tape. Say that 5 times fast. I know I can't. And the number is 130C. So
There you go.
130C is in Charlie.
Yep.
Sam makes a comment about taking care of padlocks, and that's a really
Mm,
big one. And it may be mentioned later. If it is, I'll point to it and say, "See, I told you so." But yeah, I mean, getting to a site and not being, of course, we all carry a set of 2-foot skeleton keys in the back of the truck. But if you can't get in the truck and you're on a horse or on a snowcat or whatever, and you forgot to throw the bolt cutters in there, not being able to open your lock is a
those,
recipe for
yeah,
a bad day.
and those, the padlocks with the numbers are great. The dial padlocks until they freeze up or the mechanism gets stuck or any number of other things, then they are just maddening as all get out. And I've found that having a hammer can help that, and also maybe having a small, like you said, a small butane torch or something to
Yep,
help heat
yep.
them up if it's if it's ice that's causing the issue. So just be careful not to burn your hands after you've heated up the lock.
And that's one of those, if you can still find one, I don't know if they still make them. Weller years ago used to make a butane soldering iron called the PyroPen.
Mm,
And the Pyro 10 had a blowtorch attachment, which was great because it was a temperature controllable, and you could warm something up without totally incinerating it.
yeah, I have a similar one. It's not a pen. It's not the Pyro pen. It's not a pen even, but it's they still sell these in the hardware stores. I believe it's oh, I forget who even makes it now, but it's a combination where you can use it for soldering. You can use it as a heat, as a torch for
Yeah,
a heat gun. You can
right.
use it for heat shrinking. So another
Yeah,
handy tool to keep on hand.
yeah. And Dan makes a good comment here for the guy wire visibility that foam noodles, pool noodles for swim pools with the hole down the middle, just slit it the length and then put it over the guy wire, cheap and really visible.
It
So a
is.
good way to identify guide wires. Yeah, for a couple of
Well, and
bucks a
they
wire,
they
that's
they also make those big orange balls that you can mount on them for visibility as well. You see those on power lines a lot, but I've seen them on guy
yeah.
wires as well.
Yeah, and there was a comment or two about not just smoke detectors, but carbon monoxide detectors also do need
Excellent
to be
point.
replaced on a regular
Yep.
basis. And yep, I just did ours last year. I think my smoke detectors are due next year. Um, Other things, and so there we go. Look, locks, son of a gun. I knew it was in there somewhere. But the other thing that happens a lot is the louvers on the air handling system will get stuck.
Yes.
And in the summertime, of course, they're almost always open as if you're running an exhaust air system where you don't air condition, you just use air throughput. But if they get stuck open and then in the winter you need them to close and they don't, that can be an issue. Picking on Alex again because he's not here to defend himself, but they had a situation at their site where the louver stuck open and then they had a relay fail and the intake air fan stayed on and pumped a whole bunch of minus 30-degree air into the transmitter. And when it went below 0 Celsius, which is plus 30, not minus 30, it wrapped the controller around because apparently somebody who wrote the software at the time forgot about negative numbers. And so it wrapped it around to the top end at like 184,000 degrees and shut the transmitter down for a high temp alarm.
I remember
So,
seeing that picture. That was that was something for sure. I have a
but
similar story in that I had a site where the louvers got stuck open. It was one where the hood was mounted directly to the top of the transmitter, which, by the way, don't do that.
mhm, mhm.
And snow blew right into there and got right into the transmitter. So
Yep. Yep, absolutely. So, there are several things, and I tried to hit well, and again, this came from our friends in Michigan, but the key list of the things that they like to make sure have a little bit of graphite or grease, depending, as obviously not everything gets the same treatment, depending what you want to do. Um, and that's something else to remember too, is like WD-40 is a water displacement, but it's not necessarily a lubricant. And
uh,
whereas graphite is, but it gels up really good at really cold weather.
right. One thing you do want to be aware of with lubricants is that they can actually also attract dirt
Yep.
if you don't use them properly or you don't use the correct lubricants in the correct
Right.
places. And that's the last thing you want is to be attracting dirt to to a lock, for instance.
Right.
So
And that's like the number one list here, using dry graphite on your AM contactors.
yep.
Because, yeah, gumming up the works on an ATU is just going to be a bad day for somebody. So, that's the kind of thing that you do want to. Oh, and Dan also mentions that you can get dust in your detectors and cause false alarms. So
Yep.
just use some clean, dry air to blow them out every now and again. And that's a maintenance thing that I wouldn't normally think about. But yeah, it's a really good point. Oh, look, we talked about generator maintenance. I think
Generators.
we covered most of this early on. Now, folks I've heard mixed opinions on mothballs for rodent proofing. Um, and apparently, and I say apparently because I don't know this for a fact, but apparently there are some types that emit a fume that can be bad for electronics.
It's true. Some of them can be very corrosive. It's like an ammonia type of fume that it will release, and yeah, they can be very bad for for electronics. So it is something to be aware of.
Yeah. Now, of course, we're right at the top of the hour. We have never finished one of these on time. We're not going to start today. So if you bear with us for another 10 minutes, great. If you can't, this will be archived, and any tidbits of wisdom that transpire in the next 10 or 15 minutes will certainly be recorded for posterity, so to speak.
So I want to mention one thing about generator enclosures.
Yes.
Again, in a snowy environment, you want to make sure that that enclosure is going to keep the snow out of your generator as well. So I had a couple of cases where somebody had gone and installed a generator at a site, but failed to consider the snowfall and the prevailing wind. And sure enough, when that thing went to go start up in the wintertime, the whole thing was packed full of snow.
Yeah.
So
Um,
something to be
one
aware of.
other One other comment on the locks, and I want to give a shout out to Mark Persons who put this comment in here. And
Hi,
Shane,
Mark.
you, Mark, going to say you guys have a history going back a lot of years.
White, yes,
And I hope you got to talk. Mark and Paula were both at the WBA last
I
week,
did.
so that was
I did get to have a really nice time with them. So
excellent. So Mark mentions using inner tube rubber to cover a lock to keep the water out from
that's
freezing,
an
and that's
excellent
a
tip.
really
Yeah,
good tip. Yep, and they're easy to, inner tubes are easy to come by, $3-4 at any hardware store and the great thing is doesn't matter what size, as long as it fits over the lock. So no, that's an excellent tip there. Let's see, Ray Lewis mentioned stopped using butyl tape the butylene tape several years ago. Works great till you need to remove, and it is a mess. Um, uses self-vulcanizing tape now. So that's a good point. Yeah, because the
So,
butylene tape, the adhesive it just turns into this big black tarry gluey blob.
right. So one thing that I was taught, and one thing that seems to have worked out really well, is you start with a layer of electrical tape, then you do the butylene tape, then you do another layer of electrical tape around it.
Yeah.
That seems to have been really good in terms of both waterproofing and making it so that the person coming after you doesn't curse your name for leaving a sticky mess all over the connector and cable. It cuts off really nicely and just comes right off because of the electrical tape on the base layer.
Yeah. The funny thing is, as you were saying that, William was typing the exact same thing.
There you go.
And finish with a wire tie to keep the tape flap from getting loose in the wind. So, yep. Mark mentions doesn't hurt to double up on locks if you've got like one of those chained lock access things.
Yes.
Then putting two locks on is not a bad idea because maybe only one will freeze. Um, I had Paul Tinkle was on several months ago, last fall, and he'd mentioned that they use all combination locks.
Mhm.
Same deal, but you can get the weatherproofed combination locks with the little rubber cover.
Right. Right.
But I think I like Mark's idea with the inner tube because it's cheap and it's really easy to custom fit to any lock at all. So that's a good point. Ron Zastro mentions that make sure that your vulcanizing tape is UV rated, where it wasn't. He's seen situations where it fell apart in 2 years
That's a
because
good
it.
point for anything that goes outside.
Yep. Well, and that was my little sarcastic remark earlier about the cable management on the tower with all the coaxes was white tie wraps. Yeah. Definitely use something that is rated for constant sun exposure. Um, Other thing, talking about louvers, and
Speaking of
this
snow
is,
and transmitters.
oh look, I have gotten so much mileage out of this picture. Alex tested the Wisecam, proved that the regular indoor rated Wisecams, the little $20 Wisecams, work great in sub-zero temperatures. Um, but in this particular case, the door hadn't been latched tight and it blew open. So that's where a camera is a really cheap investment to make sure that you're not. Oh, in this site, as you can see, there's no exciter, so the transmitter wasn't on at the time, which really improved its odds of being recoverable. This particular
Hey, I
picture on the
recognize that.
I was going to say, it's one of these when I pick a guest, it's like, okay, how many pictures do I have from this particular victim?
That was the same site the horses went to, and that was the site with the louvers that stuck on the generator enclosure. And yep,
And that's another one of those situations where you had to, if I remember right, dig down to get to you went in the upstairs to get the shovel to dig down to the ground floor. Was that site or a
that was a
different one?
different site. No, that was a different site. I think I've got some pictures of that at somewhere as well. I'll have to show you or send along to you.
Okay, so that is very cool. Um, and uh, and again, yeah, sometimes you're not going to solve the problem. Sometimes the louvers are on, you get a little bit of ice or snow comes down and melts in and freezes, and yeah, you can't stop it all. But again, the concept is to try to minimize the damage. I think this might have been one of your pictures too, if I'm not
I think
mistaken.
that was the very site I was referencing. And again, these are things that I inherited and just kind of shook my head when I saw. I had to laugh
Yeah.
because what else can you do?
Well, and I've had more than one call where somebody will tell me, look, we had snow blowing in. I mean, we get horizontal snow in the northern parts of the
Mhm.
world, and it blew in through the exhaust port and filled the final cavity up with snow.
That's exactly
And
what happened here. The weather hood had fallen off the building and hadn't been replaced, and the snow was blowing. The louvers were stuck, and the snow was blowing exactly that direction. So it was a perfect storm, so to speak, to cause this.
so,
The only thing
and
that
these,
figured it out was the filament, or was the actual transmitter blower. But when the filaments dropped and when that went off, there you go. There's all your pressure gone.
yep. And I mean, that's the kind of thing, again, that if you've got a hard ducted system where you don't have, even if you've got some ventilation, snow's still going to come in, it's going to fall. Gravity works.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. The
so,
other The other reason not to do this, not to duct your transmitter directly, is because of back pressure. You'll find that any gust of wind that gets into the system could potentially trip off your transmitter's airflow sensor, and then you end up with stuff like this.
yep. So definitely something. Now, one other thing, if you're one of those folks that is fortunate enough to be a little more urban in your location and have the benefit of paved driveway, if you put down markers for your showing the plow guy where the driveway ends, make sure you don't drive them through the AC wiring that feeds the site. This particular one just nicked a phase of the AC coming in to the point where everything still worked, but they had a nice little heated area for, and this is again one of Alex's sites. Poor
That's a little
Alex, he's
scary.
taking more abuse. So they just heard that the total tally for, because they ended up digging up the entire wire the length of the driveway and replacing the whole thing. So yeah, it was not inexpensive. Dan asked, would you use a shop vac to suck up the snow to prevent water in the transmitter, like in a case, and that would work well.
Well, in
Wet
fact,
dry
that's
vac.
pretty much exactly what I did because of the fact that it was still cold in the site. The snow was still snow, not water.
Yeah.
So I was
Right.
able to get most of it out of there with, between brushing and shop vac. And yeah, I mean, that's pretty much what you can do.
Right. I mean, the goal is to remove it before it melts and becomes
Exactly.
a much, much bigger problem. So we're hitting on our usual end time at 10 minutes past the top of the hour because, again, I have never, ever finished on time. I don't see the need to start now. As I said, this archive or this webinar, as with all Nautel webinars, will be archived. It's usually really good about having them up same day or the next day. He's pretty prompt and efficient. So that's a shout out to Mr. Disembodied Voice, Ed Sylvester in the background, who really makes all this stuff happen. We will have a Waves newsletter. I haven't seen a reminder, but I expect one any day. And of course, YouTube channel. YouTube channel is cool because we've got the customer service tips and tricks on there. If the service folks get something where they say, we've heard this call a lot, then somebody will do a little 5-minute video on how not to blow stuff up this particular way. And so little things like, I mean, there are things like how to unpack a VS transmitter because, well, we've all heard the discussion about the VS rack rails. Yeah, Shane's chuckling, see. So that's the kind of thing. And then millions of other resources. Barry Mishkin's BDR, he does weekly sessions on Thursday, which are a lot of fun. There are broadcastengineering.info. Chris Tyrer has a lot to do with that one. There are just so many resources, Facebook pages for you, name it. So on that note, Shane, I want to thank you very much for fighting the traffic and spending some time with us today. It
Glad to be
was
here, Jeff,
a
as always.
great one. Now, folks, don't forget we got 2 more sessions coming up this month. Ed sent me a chat to say push the next 2 TTT episodes. I don't even remember what we're talking about, but as always, we will have a heck of a lot of fun. And yeah, Greg mentions here that it's for the future when snowplow. Make sure your snowplow company is under contract and they know where you want them to plow, because that can be a big deal. So one of the sessions we're talking about, and this will raise a lot of fur sometimes, but we're talking about lean manufacturing. And so there's lean in the overused sense where nobody has any parts anytime except for emergencies, or not even then. And then there's lean where you look at ways to reduce waste. And that is the one that we focus on here. And I'm going to have Brian Irwin from manufacturing, one of our heads of the facility. And Brian is just awesome when it comes to, and Ira's talking about JIT, just in time. And that's not the same as lean, because just in time quite frequently turns into not quite in time. Whereas lean is just like if you see a repetitive process that's got extra steps, then you figure out what you can remove. Anyway, we'll talk about that. So folks, on that note, again, Shane, thanks for being here, and everybody else, thank you very much. We hope to see you next week. Have a great week. Bye now.